The best practices that we pick on are really those best practices that assume too many things about our customers. It's not necessarily like processes. I'm obviously all for processes. We developed a framework after all that is the same for everybody that goes through it, but the output is completely unique to your situation, your product, your customers, your team. So I'm all for frameworks and processes, but I don't think all best practices serve teams necessarily all that well. Because like I said before, I think a lot of teams rely on best practices as a crutch versus really understanding what is going to resonate and really hit with their ideal customers. So those are the ones that I pick on.
Got it. So we can still send you a Trust the Process t-shirt and you'll wear it.
Process is totally different from best practice, in my opinion. Those are two very, very different things.
Very fair. Thanks for clarifying.
Yes.
Yeah.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Well, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Inside the Process, where we sit down with some of the brightest minds in business and dig into their process secrets and best practices to help you continuously improve and level up the work that you're doing. I'm Mallory, a 10-year systems and ops veteran turned marketer, and I'm here with Shawn, the super awesome training and dev guy, better known here as Mentor Shawn.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here with you. And I am so excited. We have the amazing Georgiana Laudi here joining us today. And she is the co-founder of Forget the Funnel and a total SaaS growth genius. So she's been in the game since Y2K. Yes, really. And she's been working with brands like Unbounce and Sprout Social, helping high growth teams turn customer insights into actual revenue. So Gia is all about helping companies getting inside their customers' heads and use the knowledge to scale in a way that actually makes sense. So no fluffy strategies here. She also happens to live in one of my favorite places and childhood stomping grounds right out there in Montreal. So Gia, we're so excited that you're here. Thank you so much. Welcome. We're excited to learn from you today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. What a nice intro. I love it.
Well, Gia, I'm a big believer in being resourceful, tactical, hands-on, very feedback-driven to achieve your ultimate potential, whether that be personally or as a team. I like to think it's what got me from a long career in ops to this brand new life as a marketer, which I'm still very much getting used to. And when I think about customer journey mapping, it sounds like something a little out of a marketing textbook, somewhat intimidating, if I can be straight with you. But in the real world, you sort of toss the textbook out the window, which is a very fun visual, I might add. It kind of makes you sound badass. And you're using a new way to help teams increase revenue and adoption, reduce churn, which is always something that's really tough, and ultimately stand out in a world that's very hard to stand out in. And I love this line from your site that says, "We created the customer-led growth framework, and then we wrote the book on it." Hell yeah to that. Take us behind the scenes for a second. How should businesses map out their end-to-end customers experience with growth super top of mind?
Yeah. So thank you. I really think it is to everyone's advantage, to teams' advantage, to think about their customers' relationship with them through the lens of like the leaps of faith that our customers take in our relationship with us. Which ultimately helps us understand the milestones in a customer's journey. I am definitely on the side of things that believes that a customer journey does not start when somebody lands on your website. So I often refer to it as customer experience mapping versus customer journey mapping. A lot of people have, associated connotations with customer journey mapping. And oftentimes what I find is that folks leave out the phase of the customer's experience before customers even know that you exist. And oftentimes customer journeys leave out the post-acquisition or the sort of value growth phase. That's particularly true of funnels, right? They don't talk a lot about like the problem space. They certainly don't talk a lot about post-acquisition or like relationships with customers, ongoing continued value being delivered to customers. So we call it customer experience mapping for that reason, because it's really about understanding the end-to-end customer experience. And in that end-to-end experience, our customers go through these sort of what I call like leaps of faith or milestones in their relationship with us. And if our team can get really clear on what those milestones are and what our customers need to experience at each of those milestones, then we can make much better decisions about how to optimize that experience for customers, how to measure our ability to help customers get from one milestone to the next. So that's what gets me really jazzed about customer experience mapping. Even though it's definitely not a new concept, I do think deeply understanding customers and operationalizing that understanding of customers is not something enough companies do, honestly.
What are some of those milestones that we should be looking at and that we should be hitting as we think about this framework?
Yeah. So typically, I would say there are three higher level phases in our customer's relationship with us. There's the struggle phase where your customer is out in the world experiencing the problem that your product or solution can help them solve. So they're suffering through the old way. Maybe that's a competing product. Maybe that was some previous solution. Maybe it was, a bubblegum and toothpicks situation or a spreadsheet. Many times it's a spreadsheet. So struggling with the old way. And eventually they hit a point where they're like, forget this. I can't live like this anymore. There must be a better way. And they sort of switch into solution seeking mode. They start talking to colleagues. They start searching around the internet. They start, their initial sort of research into what a better way could be. And then eventually they discover that you exist. And then in their experience, most likely either in your marketing materials or on your website, they're trying to get a sense of whether or not your solution can help them solve that very painful problem that they have. And then ultimately what they'll do is on that website, they'll make that sort of leap of faith into whether or not they want to actually try it on for size, actually see if your solution can, for themselves, whether or not your solution can solve their problem. And so that's the struggle phase where they're battling the old way, still suffering through the old way, and then eventually get to a point where they're willing to make a leap of faith into trying something new. And then they go into the evaluation phase. And the evaluation phase is generally, we refer to it as like first value and value realization. But sometimes it's more complicated than that because some products and customers and companies are more complex. So not all evaluation phases look the same. But in general, there's like a first value phase where you're helping customers see that your at least early signs that your solution can solve their problem. So this is where you would do like product onboarding and maybe email onboarding and product onboarding flows, or potentially if you're in a high touch or sales led situation, that would be where, you go through a demo experience and maybe book a second call or get a little bit deeper. And then value realization is where you've actually solved that customer's problem. We use jobs to be done, which we can talk about a little bit, but it's generally where we'd say that, we've solved our customers' job to be done at value realization. And that's the end of the evaluation phase. Then we go into the growth phase, and the growth phase is where things get really, really fun. So growth phase is where we're delivering continued value to our customers and also helping them use our product and our solution in more sophisticated ways, maybe expanded ways, and even move into value growth where we're really talking about, potentially word of mouth or referral programs, or again, expanding their usage of your product in ways that might mean an upgrade or some sort of other, opportunity there. So that's value growth. We're talking about like net revenue retention when we're in the growth phase. So those three phases, struggle, evaluation, and growth, are broken down into those milestones. And that's really like, in order to understand what your customers need at each of those phases, it's really important to deeply understand your ideal customers, because that's what your team needs in order to create those amazing experiences for them.
Yeah, and that's really where I want to jump in is understanding who our customers are. I think a lot of us, we think that we understand exactly who our customers are, but I think you say that a lot of businesses have that wrong, that they don't actually know. So
many. How
do we really figure out who our ideal customers are? What are the steps that we can take? And, what are the shifts that we can expect to see when we finally get that right?
So yeah, two parts to that question for sure. So I'll answer the first part first. Like, how do we understand who our ideal customers are? So generally, we recommend running a sort of like foundational type of customer research. And when I say customer research, I don't like using the word research or customer research because everybody gets like itchy because a lot of people have had bad experiences with customer research. They might think it takes a long time or it's super expensive or it leads to more questions than answers. I've heard every horror story in the book about how badly customer research can go. And honestly, Forget the Funnel was founded on this idea of like customer research that dies on a shelf is like, we want customer-led growth to be the antidote to that. We want customer research to be actually like operationalized and actualized inside of teams. So what we do is a kind of a foundational, but also pretty rapid style customer research. And we use Jobs to be Done for this. We have never found a framework or approach to research that is better than the Jobs to be Done framework for understanding what our customers are trying to achieve. So Jobs to be Done is based on the theory that people hire your solution or products to get a job done. And so what Jobs to be Done does is facilitates basically us to run through a series of questions that gives us a documentary-like understanding of our customers' experience with us. Again, from before they know that we exist, them actually experiencing the problem all the way through to singing our praises from the mountaintops. And again, the Jobs to be Done approach is really, really effective at doing this. So generally what we'd say is you can run even just 10 to 12 Jobs to be Done interviews. It's segmentation on who you learn from is really, really important. But even just 10 to 12 well-run Jobs to be Done interviews can give you insight into all that context that I was talking about and that deeply understanding what matters to your customers and making sure that what you're doing, your positioning, your messaging, the customer experience that you're building is really going to resonate with them. And I can talk, a ton more about that, but that's the short answer on how do we identify who our ideal customers are. ICP profiles and attributes, demographic attributes, they're very valuable, but not at this level. We want to have that psychographic understanding of our customers so that we know what is really going to resonate with them. ICP and demographic data is important, but not for what I'm talking about here. We want that psychographic understanding of our customers. And then once we have that understanding, we can map that customer experience, like I just mentioned, through those milestones. And then if we've done that well, to answer the second part of your question, what we're going to see is a lot more clarity for the team on who that ideal customer is, a shared language for the team to use to talk about that customer. Sometimes we work with teams that focus on more than one job to be done. They are at the point where they've evolved beyond just one initial job to be done. So they have two different segments of customers that they want to focus on and be really successful with. And again, having that shared alignment and understanding around customers facilitates those discussions and the experiences that we build. So you may have experienced, onboarding into a product and they ask you some sort of question about what are you most hoping to do? And they may segment you into one group so that you're getting the most appropriate onboarding for you. That would be an example of how a company would sort of address two jobs to be done. But my point in that is that the team has that shared understanding, understands what those milestones are, understands how we measure success across those milestones, and also really, really importantly, understands their role in what milestones are they responsible for. So that's hugely advantageous for teams to facilitate and get a better understanding of like handoff points, performance goals and metrics and things like that too. So that's another way that you'll know things are working. And then obviously increased conversions are what is going to be the ultimate cherry on top of this really working, is that all of your performance metrics will go up as your team starts to implement.
Yeah, I love that. That's you just call on something that I'm really big on. That is, helping the team to understand what these visions are, what you need to accomplish. Because sometimes we find that out at the leadership level and forget that we also need to translate that and transmit that in a way to the team so they can also be on board and buy into it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for people like me that are super new to the Jobs to be Done, but find it really fascinating and want to experiment with it, is there maybe a simple framework to follow in terms of conducting these customer based interviews to help them really successfully identify some of the jobs to be done?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say the most important thing to do if you want to do this process, run through this process, is segment customers who are representative of the direction you want to go in as a business. So they're the customers you would clone if you could. So really segmenting the ideal customer is really important. The other thing that I would say is obviously segmenting customers who are like happy, right? So not customers that are at risk of churn or that may be, not experiencing, a ton of value, or that might be slightly problematic. But then the other thing that's really important too with segmentation is that you're learning from customers who signed up recently enough ago that they remember what life was like before. So recency is really, really important. You can't go to customers that signed up and made a purchase decision 2 years ago and expect them to remember how much life sucked before. We want them to viscerally recall how much it sucked to have the problem that you now help them solve. So that's really, really important as well. And I would say that in general, when running a jobs to be done interview, you're trying to get a documentary-like understanding of their experience with you. You're not asking them their opinion. You're not asking them about what they think about this feature or that feature, what their favorite thing is. Again, it's not opinion-based at all. So really understanding, just having them walk you through what the process was for them. And I will say that customer interviewing, it can be intimidating. It is, it's an acquired skill. So we've worked with a lot of teams that are like, we know we need to do this stuff. We just don't have anybody on the team that is, skilled in interviewing. I would say that is often the case. We've also worked with teams that tried to do it themselves, and then the interviews ended up not being super useful because the interviewer wasn't skilled. I'm not trying to deter anybody from trying to do this themselves. We've got tons of resources to help teams do this themselves. I would just, if anybody listening wants to implement this, or Mallory, if you want to implement this, the one thing that I would say is do your research on and practice running interviews, maybe run some mock interviews to practice running through the questions and making sure that you're not asking leading questions, that you're not, potentially unintentionally adding some of your own opinions into things. It's an acquired skill. Let me just put it that way.
I love that, though. It gives people a really actionable place to start. So I really appreciate how you kind of frame that out.
Yeah. I have a question about the interviewing too. Who are you interviewing specifically? Are you interviewing the business leaders? Are you interviewing all across the company?
Good question.
Who's part of these interviews?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think it depends on your goals. So generally where we start is the champion. So whoever was the person who championed your solution inside of their organization. But the answer to that question is a little bit different depending on your situation. So, you might be in a situation, you might sell a product that has a functional user and only a functional user, and your champion and your economic buyer and your functional user is the same person. Or you might be selling into companies that have more complex organizations and buying committees. In that case, I would say, depending on your goals, again, if you're trying to figure out, how do we reach more of our ideal fit customers out in the market? And how do we help demonstrate to them that we understand their problems and help them evaluate our solution? Then I would say focus on the person who is most in charge of and sort of championing that early side of the customer experience. So the person who's tasked with solving the problem that you help them solve. And again, like I said, championing your solution internally. Sometimes that's an economic buyer. Sometimes it's a functional user. Sometimes it's a combination of the two. Sometimes there's like I said, there's a technical buyer sometimes involved, but oftentimes technical buyers are involved a little bit later. So the answer kind of depends on your unique situation. But in general, we say the person who made that initial outreach and is the person that needs to champion you forward. Without them, your deal dies on the vine. They're the person you should prioritize. But if your goals are more around helping them get across the finish line with value realization, and there's a technical buyer, well, then you should talk to that technical buyer. If your goal is more around how do we, lean more into customer marketing and expansion or a referral program, then you're probably going to talk to a different individual at that point because there's a different champion at that part of the customer experience. Does that make sense?
Yep. Makes total sense. I love that.
Foundationally, I would start with that first champion. Make sure you've got that in place because then you can build on it.
100%. Yeah. So I've got one more follow question to that because the interviewing is really fascinating to me here. I love that you talked about segmenting your customers by the ones you want to clone. Mm-hmm. I love that. And the ones that are happy customers. Okay.
And recent.
Yeah. Right. Now, let me flip this one a little bit, but is there value in if it's possible, interviewing, finding people who are the opposite of that, mm-hmm. of, that we're not happy, that you really screwed something up for them and, finding out what that looks like and researching that side of things?
Yeah. Absolutely. But no, I wouldn't start there. So I would start with that foundational, who are we serving well today? And how can we do a better job of serving those, getting more of those customers? It is always helpful to learn from the customers that you lost for sure when you want to go optimize your experiences and try to figure out how to win more of the opportunity that exists in the market. But I wouldn't start there. That's like the level up. That's the 102. But if you don't have the 101 and the 101 level understanding of who your ideal customers are today and how could you serve more of them better, increase conversions, get more bang for your buck on your marketing spend, things like that, I would not go to win-loss analysis. Win-loss analysis can be really, really advantageous, but as a second step.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great.
So I was in ops for almost a decade. Before making the big switch to marketing.
I love that.
I'm still, the verdict is still out. No, I'm just kidding. I love it too. But I've seen firsthand on both sides of the coin how customer experience touches every part of the business, from ops to sales to marketing to product support to all the things we're talking about where it's internal, it's external. It's really just so ingrained in absolutely everything, which makes a lot of sense in many ways. I actually started in aerospace and defense, but found myself just trying to get closer and closer to working on projects that really benefited the customer and got me closer to the customer experience. And we've talked about this, not necessarily from the perspective of like wanting to be like a CSM or manage the customer relationship, but truly what they experience from the time they find your product, or even to your point before, all the way through to customer acquisition. And there's obviously just so much that people can do in that space that, impact those outcomes, what the customer experiences, but it takes all hands on deck from all those departments that we just talked about. And mm-hmm. there's a ton of crossover between those departments. And I have seen firsthand just, the silos that it can create when you're trying to improve like one piece, and then the domino effect of what, how it affects mm-hmm. the customer experience, the employee experience. Yep. It can kind of be, what was that one game many years ago? Like the landmine game. You remember that? Like one of the first like OG computer games.
Minesweeper.
Yeah, there we go.
Minesweeper.
It kind of reminds me of that sometimes when I think about customer experience. But there's a question in here, and it's any tips for keeping everyone in sync and continuously improving the customer mm-hmm. experience?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a huge problem. Absolutely. And when we talk about customer-led growth and the process of customer experience mapping, I'm always very mindful of the fact that it is so cross-functional. And that's so in the early days, my answer would have been, hey, laser focus on one part of your customer experience that needs improving. Like your positioning and messaging, let's say. And, we would get just the marketing team together and maybe somebody from the product team. And we would do a sort of, like a task force type of thing, just focused on solving this one thing. Or I've worked in teams too, where there was a task force to address just churn. We would be addressing just one particular part of the customer experience and how problematic to your point, that can end up being. Nowadays, I'm definitely in the camp of no, we need all of the go-to-market motion. And even sometimes outside of that, to your point, especially if ops is very involved in go-to-market, basically all those folks have to be in the room. And they have to be on board with this task of better understanding customers and operationalizing the customer experience so that all teams benefit. And generally what we have found is so founders, obviously, and also heads of product tend to be our champions. So they're the folks that reach out to us and they're like, no, this company needs better alignment and better clarity around who this target customer is so that we can collectively as a company do a better job of addressing their needs. And so generally what we do is we'll start working with a few stakeholders at the beginning. And then we'll start pulling in other folks like customer facing teams and go-to-market teams like head of marketing, head of customer success, head of sales, product marketing, if there is somebody in that role, head of product, certainly. And then folks on the C-suite, if they aren't represented in the people that I just mentioned, really on board with this exercise of learning from these ideal customers to then operationalize their experience. And so what we do is we basically kick off, we run that research, then we all meet to align around what we learned about those amazing customers. And then we meet 2 weeks later after we've done this sort of heuristic analysis of the customer experience they deliver today to sit down with everybody in the room virtually and basically go over everything that we learned, but also all the opportunities that we identified across the customer experience so that all those cross-functional leaders all know that everybody else knows that we're all in the room together, aligning around what is out of alignment for customers today. And one of the most powerful things about that is that everybody's there and everybody is given the space to discuss, their perspective, what they've tried historically, what they think could potentially work. We basically workshop growth opportunities that we identified with the team because nobody knows better than the team themselves, what they've tried in the past, their experiences with customers, where the company is going. So we get a lot of feedback on that workshop. We do like a half-day workshop at the end where we go over everything. We get a ton of feedback on that workshop, doing more in an afternoon than what teams are able to do sometimes in, quarters or years. So that at the top level is like, it's got to be there because if you're trying to go rogue and like lone wolf it, like we sometimes refer to, it's very, very hard. It can be done, but it can take a long time. And you've got to have that sort of that buy-in and that sponsorship from the executive team and from the stakeholders. Otherwise, you're not going to get it outside of your team.
That's one funnel you can get behind, right? Top down.
Touche.
Executives down to the team for sure. I'm glad we share that in common. I preach that all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that in mind, is there maybe one mistake that you see time and time again? You've worked with hundreds of teams, maybe thousands, I'm not sure. But there might be a commonality that you see in terms of mistakes that people can make, or maybe, Definitely. Some advice that you can give that says like, hey, if you do one thing right, just don't do this one thing.
Yeah. I mean, definitely we see a lot of teams needlessly guessing what to do and guessing how to grow. And it's really, really not necessary. The type of research that we're talking about can take just a couple of weeks. Like we do this in 6 weeks. So anybody who says that they don't have time to do customer research is like fooling themselves and really shortchanging their team. Because you can absolutely do pretty rapid style research in order to unpack and sort of unlock, so to speak, these growth opportunities. You do not need to be guessing. You don't need to be relying on best practices. You don't need to be relying on like what the experts out in the world are telling you. You don't need to be relying on what your competitors are doing, or what the channel experts are telling you. You really can go to the source and learn from your amazing customers and build a customer experience that is going to be really resonant with them instead of this repeated sort of spaghetti at the wall style growth tactics and marketing that I see happen so often. And teams are just sinking money into marketing that doesn't work. And they're just in this repeated sort of hamster wheel of like throwing ideas against the wall to see what will stick instead of going to customers and finding out what is going to work from them. And then, like I said, going back and sort of identifying what's going to resonate with them, identifying what do they actually really, really care about? What is it about your solution that convinces them to give it a try, that convinces them that they're the right solution, that you're the right solution for them, that, leads them to get that sort of continued value from your solution over time. If you can identify that, then all that greases the wheels for so many better, growth strategies and marketing strategies moving forward.
Yeah, I think about this in terms of bucketing this into one of those things where the time and effort seems daunting to do, but the ROI on the back end of this, when it's done correctly, is massively way, way more worth it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Think about that, about process documentation. All right, that's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So everyone likes to talk about key performance indicators, right? KPIs. We love our KPIs, but how do you actually connect the great customer experience with hitting those really, really important numbers? I'd love to hear your take on that first off, and maybe follow up after that. But
yeah, I mean, I'll speak to, I can tell a specific story potentially. Where I want to go with this is the value mapping exercise that we run through basically. And it could be helpful to sort of run through an example, but at the high level, to sort of explain how we do this, is there are some of the KPIs are very obvious, right? So actually, even let me back up one more step. So the KPIs that we help teams uncover are related to the customer experience. So different milestones in that customer experience. Now, I'm not saying that those KPIs are the end all be all for a business. There's still room for setting targets around MRR growth, or, all other types of KPIs that might be utilized generally as like lagging indicators of success. Generally, what we do is when we're doing this customer experience mapping process and we identify those milestones, we're looking for leading indicators of success that help teams get more immediate feedback on the experiences that they're building for customers so that they know if what they're doing is working and will actually influence those lagging indicators of success. So I just wanted to set that sort of like leading indicators versus lagging indicators. So for each of those milestones, it's important to have a measure of success. It's important for the team to know that we've done our job helping customers get from one milestone to the next. Some of them are really obvious. So if in the struggle phase, net new visitors to our website. So new unique visitors to our website tell us that marketing is doing a good job at bringing new people to the front door. A conversion rate on a website, pretty straightforward. Ideally, you've got one primary call to action on your website, one primary thing you want customers to do on your website, whether or not that's sign up for free, start a trial, book a demo. Those KPIs are easy. The evaluation phase is where things get a little bit crunchier. And so what we do at that for the evaluation phase is we look actually to the growth phase of continued value. So what does a happy, healthy customer look like? How does a happy, healthy customer use our product? And at what cadence of that product usage should we expect to see and basically strive for? Because if we can identify that product usage, then we can sort of reverse engineer the KPI, the first value KPI and the value realization KPI from there. So a specific example of this would be like a feature that provides, an outsized impact. So you might call that your value metric, or maybe it's your North Star sort of product usage. Every team uses slightly different language to talk about these things, which is why I'm like going to throw all the terms at you because
we use North Star over here.
Yeah. Bring it on.
North Star. There you go. So generally your North Star would be sort of focused around happy, healthy customers. Like, that your customers are happy and healthy if they're hitting that type of product usage and also hitting it at a cadence that shows us that those customers are healthy and happy and getting continued value. Then there's kind of two different directions we can go from there. There's what do they need to experience right before that? And then where things get very interesting, where would they go after that, right? So what would product expansion look like? So that might be adding team members. It might be using the tool, different parts of the tool in more sophisticated ways. It might be, referral or reviews or whatever, right? There's all kinds of other things that you can do. But the KPIs that we want to really generally understand for teams, because these are the ones that are missing, are first value and value realization. So what parts of the product do we need to show to our customers in what order as we're introducing our solution to them? And so we do a process called value mapping, where we basically take the exact words that customers say in those conversations, so we call them the value themes, basically. So what came up a lot, not the features, but just the value, the things that they really cared about, the things that really mattered to them. And we identify generally about 3 to 4 dominant themes that show up. And then we take those themes and we map them to the specific parts of the product that deliver that value. We call that value mapping. It's the part of the process that we do prior to the customer experience mapping, because it helps us figure out what the milestones would be. But it's also wildly valuable for KPI development and figuring out what's the product usage we should be looking for customers to basically hit at each of these milestones, so that we're not providing them with too many tools in the toolbox, right? Like a lot of companies have this problem where somebody's onboarding and all of a sudden we're throwing out all the toys in the toy box at them and want them to do all the things really quickly, but that's generally not the most advantageous experience. So what is the most appropriate experience to give them? And how do we measure, how do we see that they've hit that product usage, is how we would identify first value KPI. And then value realization is the product usage that shows us they're bought in, they get it, they're going to use this thing, they've fired the old way, they're hiring us, we've solved their job to be done. So what product usage would we need to look for there? And then I already mentioned continued value, which is generally what teams would think of as North Star. And then value expansion I talked about as well. Also. So does that answer your question about KPIs? There's a lot of nuance in there, and it's very product and customer specific, which is why that research is so important.
Yeah. I love the values-based approach there on what they find of value. It makes me think, this is how I go about training people. Is it's not just, if on a website, let's not just go through every single tab and everything in the list of every menu on the tab, right? It's finding those things that are the most value, that mean the most, and how it aligns with those components and focusing on that. Yes. I love that. It's such a great strategy.
Aha moment, magic moment,
right.
Product activation. Everybody's got different terminology for it, but it's really important to get that right.
Love it.
This has been such a tactical and insightful conversation. I feel like there's just so many nuggets that you provided people that they can actually do something with. So thank you so much for your time and just bringing a wealth of knowledge to this conversation. But I have to derail us for this last question and put you on the spot a little bit here, okay? Because you have somewhat of a controversial stance on your website that states, stop wasting time with best practices.
Mm-hmm.
What? Yes. And we are inside the process after all, and Trainual is the ultimate best practice tool, I might add. So you got to tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah. I guess there's a lot of different ways to interpret best practices, because the best practices that we pick on are really those best practices that assume too many things about our customers. So an example might be, we need to lead with benefits over features. That might be true, but it might not be true. It depends on who your target customer is. There are scenarios where leading with features actually makes a lot of sense. So that's a best practice that might not resonate 100% with your customers or might not be the most advantageous strategy for you. There's also a best practice of always be testing, and you need to A/B test everything. That's not always true. You're not always in a situation to A/B test everything well. Right? There's a lot of difficulty for a lot of teams can't get to statistical significance. And so A/B testing feels out of reach for them. And you don't actually need to do it that way. You shouldn't be A/B testing everything. That you can, roll out better customer experiences without A/B testing. That's another one. Another best practice that we like to pick on is you should remove all friction from your product onboarding. That's not necessarily true. some product onboardings benefit from having a little bit of appropriate friction being added there. So when I say best practices, those are the kinds that I'm talking about. It's not necessarily like processes. I'm obviously all for processes. We developed a framework, after all, that is the same for everybody that goes through it, but the output is completely unique to your situation, your product, your customers, your team. So I'm all for frameworks and processes, but I don't think all best practices serve teams necessarily all that well. Because like I said before, I think a lot of teams rely on best practices as a crutch versus really understanding what is going to, resonate and really hit with their ideal customers. So those are the ones that I pick on.
Got it. So we can still send you a Trust the Process t-shirt and you'll wear
it. Process is totally different from best practice, in my opinion. Those are two very, very different things.
Very fair. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today, Gia. Tell folks where they can follow you.
I would check out forgetthefunnel.com if you're interested. We wrote a book, a very short, practical book. If anybody's interested in the customer-led growth framework and wants to learn about or figure out whether or not they think it can work for them. We have a book about the process. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I gave up on Twitter a little while ago, but relatively active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. But I guess best place to go if you're interested is definitely forgetthefunnel.com.
Awesome. Well, be sure to click the link in our show notes for a made-for-you process template that highlights all of the best practices, in fairness, and processes highlighted today for customer-led growth with Gia today. So as always, document your processes and be a good human. We will catch you next time.